Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I bring a new pair of words to share their stories with each other and you. You can find our past episodes and the occasional blog post on our website at lexitecture.com. Follow along with us on Twitter and Facebook at Lexitecture, and if you really like what we do, you can support the show at patreon.com/lexitecture. Today's episode, Fancy Trepanning.
So, happy 50th.
Yes, 50 episodes.
How did that happen?
Crazy. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's weird.
absolutely crazy.
Remember that time when we were like, want to do a podcast? And you went, sure, what's a podcast?
See, that sounds like a glib story, but that's exactly the conversation that we had.
Literally, that's word for word, yeah.
Word for word. Yeah, at that time, I thought that just like inserting the word pod into some sort of phrase just meant it was expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Not expensive. iPod, expensive.
Get
at
saving.
the time.
So, ironically, the word that I've chosen to talk about this week has indirectly come to me from the good folks at Apple. Now, long documented history of your hatred for Apple.
It's true.
Even though I have to say that the screensaver really is exceptionally good. I love the screensaver. It's as though it's been watching me and knows what kind of words I like.
It has been.
I mean, it could well have been, but also I quite like a lot of words. So
well, that's true. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's a hard kind of target to aim for. It's probably the size of a small continent, but nonetheless, it's yeah. So it's thanks to Apple that we have. Do you know? I'm a little bit. I don't really have one word this week.
Okay.
I have a place where I started and a place where I got to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the word that I started with isn't in the Oxford English Dictionary. Is that allowed?
Well, yes.
Nobody knows.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a word that you will have seen on the internet, and particularly if you happen to notice things like Apple releasing yet another rectangle of expensiveness
Right.
in line with a giant queue of people that seems to just materialise whenever they say, this day, this place, give us your money.
Yeah.
And the new Apple, whatever number it is, iPhone, it was accused in the sort of internet press of affecting people who suffer from trypophobia. Have you seen this story?
No.
Okay, cool. I had seen trypophobia before because myself and my husband like to look at weird things on the internet. I suppose it's probably... So I'm pretty sure it came about from Ross saying, oh, look at this, and me going, look at that. And on such exchanges of relationships built. Trypophobia is... It's one of these kind of jimmied together using lumps of Greek words.
Right.
That are not hugely uncommon in English. Trypophobia is a fear of holes.
Oh, yes. Yes. There's
so
a
the fact that
subreddit
the new
devoted to this,
iPhone has, I don't know, like 8 gazillion cameras on it, something like that. And they're all kind of quite closely, there's camera holes and there's microphone holes and there's, I don't know, space laser holes. And they're all kind of grouped together on the front or back of the phone. And apparently it's upsetting people.
Gotcha.
So the kind of quintessential image that is often put online next to people talking about this phobia, if you want to call it that, is the holes in the seed head of lotuses. So if you Google that,
yes.
I'm sure we can post a picture of this on Facebook or Twitter or somewhere like that. And basically it looks like a little shower head, the seed head of a lotus flower.
Yeah.
Other things like honeycombs, probably the kind of... The one example of this where I thought, oh, I can see why people would be upset by that, was a pattern that had been created by someone. No, let me be clear, it was entirely photoshopped, but it looked like someone had knelt on a whole load of ball bearings in a very regular pattern.
Right.
So it was a human knee with tens of little ball-bearing shaped holes in it.
Right, yeah.
Okay. So, trypophobia, someone was talking about it in the course that I was doing the other week. And it's from Greek trupa, meaning hole, and phobia, which you've talked about before.
Yeah.
Episode 36. I looked it up. And Wiktionary says it's said to have been coined by a blogger from Ireland in 2005. So at least 2005, people were considering that there's something about small circular holes that make them feel a little bit icky.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, trypophobia, that's an interesting word. Is it real? So quickly I discovered, well, no. I mean, in terms of, it's not in the OED. It's not a word that you can kind of look up its antecedents with any more accuracy than I've given you. But it's clearly a word that it's two parts of meaning that have been put together. And it communicates to the people who use it, who understand those two parts, something greater than those two parts by themselves.
Right.
So, yeah, it's like a word has been born. This is quite nice. It's sort of new and shiny.
Nice.
And, of course, I started to think, well, that's an interesting root, trupa, a hole. I wonder where else that word has appeared. And so the possible word that I am, in fact, talking about today is trepanning. Trepanning.
Okay.
So it seemed pretty clear to me that trupa and trepa were not a million miles away from each other.
Right.
And when I looked up trepanning, it was a word that I was familiar with for reasons that will become clear. And I had a little look at it on Etim Online. And Etim Online has the verb trepan. Now, I have no idea if it's trepan or trepan or trepan or however else you can vary the pronunciation of this word. Here's what they have to say about it. From circa 1400, from Old French, trepanner, from trepan, the name of the tool with which it was done, from medieval Latin trepanum, a saw for cutting out small pieces of bone from the skull. From Greek trepanon, a borer, an auger, a carpenter's tool, a surgeon's trepan, from trepan to bore, related to trepe, hole, which is cognate with Old Church Slavonic truplu, which means hollow.
Sorry,
From
Old Church Slavonic?
Yeah, Old Church Slavonic.
That's fantastic.
I don't even really know what that means. I just wanted to say it out loud because it feels very clever.
Yeah, I hope we have one listener who's just like
Old Church
happy
Slavonic.
right now, because that's their niche, that's their jam. They just Old Church Slavonic it up all day long, and they're like, finally!
Some recognition, damn it.
Yeah. This one's for you, whoever you are.
This one's for you, yes. Old Church Slavonic enthusiast. And so it comes from a PIE root, trup, T-R-U-P, from a root, T-E-R-E, terre, which means to rub or to turn. Now, as I said, I overheard someone talking about trypophobia relating to the new iPhone at a course that I was at. It was a sports massage course. And when I started idly Googling where this word might come from, because that's absolutely the kind of thing that I do since the internet lives in my pocket,
Right.
I found this PIE root, terre. Now, this was very interesting to me because I was studying sports massage. One of the things we were looking at was anatomy. There are two muscles in the shoulder called teres. T-E-R-E-S. Teres major, teres minor.
Okay.
And I started to think, oh, interesting. I wonder if we have a little etymological coincidence going on here. That would be quite pleasant. Mm-hmm. So here's what Etim Online has to say about terre, this PIE root. I feel like, me and Terry, we go way back.
Yeah.
It's a Proto-Indo-European root meaning to rub or to turn, with derivatives referring to twisting, also to boring, drilling, piercing, to the rubbing of cereal grain to remove the husks, and thus to threshing.
Wow.
Now, here are some wonderful, wonderful cognates. It forms all or part of atresia, a turn, attorney, attrition, contour, contrite, detour, detriment, diatribe, drill, as in to bore a hole, lithotripsy, return, septentrion, thrash, thread, thresh, throw, threshold, trauma, trepan, tribadism, tribology, tribulation, trite, triticale, triturate, trout, trypsin, tryptophan, and turn.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a wild ride there.
Quite a motley crew. We have a second sense for the same pi root.
Okay.
Meaning to cross over, to pass through, or to overcome. This gives us all our part of avatar, caravanserai, nectar, nectarine, nostril, seraglio, thrill, thorough, through, tranche, trans, transient, transom, trench, truculent, truncate, and trunk. So looking at these two terry roots, I started to wonder which one of these meanings has given its name to the teres muscle. And frankly, I espoused science at that point and thought, ooh, what do I think? And what I find interesting is teres major is a muscle that turns your arm, it externally rotates it, and it helps the muscles in your back, your lats, it helps the lat to do all the same movements. So it certainly is a turning muscle, a muscle that creates rotation. And teres minor is one of the muscles of the rotator cuff, and it specifically crosses over from the shoulder blade to the femur.
Huh.
So basically, either of these muscle names could have come from either of these roots. I didn't get too far down that rabbit hole because trepanning sparked off a little memory for me. But first, we had some pretty cool words that I've kind of skipped over without giving them their due care and attention.
Yeah.
So septentrion, which was I could hear you oohing.
Yeah.
Septentrion, in reference to the sky, it is another word for the Big Dipper.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, isn't that lovely? The Great Bear, the 7 stars of the Big Dipper, also figuratively the northern regions, the north, 7 plough oxen from septem, 7, and trio, as in plough ox, and from the stem of terere, to rub.
Oh, that's
I don't know
cool.
why the stars are rubbing. Perhaps it's the ploughing and the threshing part that we're picking up on there.
Septentrion. That's awesome.
The next time you find yourself looking up at the sky, see if you can spot the septentrion. Yeah, I like that one a lot.
That's fantastic.
There was also tryptophan. Tryptophan is an amino acid.
That's the thing in turkey that makes you sleepy, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was discovered in 1890, coined in German, and it's believed. So we have the trip terry kind of root. It's believed that it was called tryptophan because in order to isolate it, I think it was a pancreas was rubbed with glycerin, and that's how tryptophan picks up this rubbing, kind of separating out sort of sense,
right?
Which is quite lovely.
It is.
And we also then have trepanning, this word that I've chosen to talk about that I still don't really know how to pronounce. Drilling a hole in someone's head. Yep, that's what trepanning is.
Yeah,
there is a special word to describe that thing. And the reason that I was so delighted to find that tryptophobia made its way etymologically from the same place as trepanning is because I discovered what trepanning was when I was about 14, 15, when I was studying Latin at school.
Okay.
And as part of my Latin course at school, I had to do, they called it an investigation, like a report on an aspect of Roman culture. And I chose to look at Roman medicine.
Oh, yeah.
And I discovered that the Romans were drilling holes in each other's skulls all over the place. just let that settle in. In a land,
in Rome.
long ago, far away, not that far away, a land and a culture very, very much pre-anesthesia, people were drilling holes in each other's skulls.
Yeah.
Not only that,
there's a fear of holes I can get behind.
Not only that, and this comes from Wikipedia, there are lots and lots of interesting articles and places to find out about trepanning online, some of which are sketchy, more on that in a minute. But Wikipedia states that it's perhaps the oldest surgical procedure for which there is archaeological evidence, and in some areas may have been quite widespread. So when we start to look at the dates at which people were drilling holes in each other's skulls, there is a burial site in France dated to 6,500 BCE, where 40 out of 120 skulls had trepanation holes.
Wow, that's a lot.
Now,
that's too many.
I was pretty fascinated by the fact that the Romans could drill holes in each other's skulls, and then I started to do a little bit more digging, started to do a bit more reading about it, and found it seems that this is old hat. This is perhaps the oldest of all old hats. Let's drill a hole in someone's skull. What are they doing? What's it all about? It's actually a procedure that's still carried out medically today. It's often...
I see.
It's kind of used to relieve pressure within the skull. So pressure from infection or injury, anything to do with sort of swelling and not having enough space, basically.
Right.
So it's, Wikipedia goes on to talk about it, and in its section, Modern Medical Practices, it says that it talks first about the prefrontal leucotomy, a precursor to lobotomy, was performed by cutting a trephine hole into the skull and then just, getting mash happy with the brain. Lobotomies, thank goodness, don't tend to happen so much these days, certainly not under any kind of license. But trepanation still does. It says here again, Wikipedia, it's a treatment used for epidural and subdural hematomas, so bleeding on the brain, and for certain other, for surgical access for certain other procedures, such as intracranial pressure monitoring. They usually call it craniotomy, as in cutting the skull.
Right.
And I love this line. The removed piece of skull is typically replaced as soon as possible.
Typically.
Like, oh no, I dropped it. Oh God.
Oh crap, where'd I put that bit of skull?
Did you get that? Oh no, it's under the couch. Damn it.
Just rinse it off, it'll be fine.
Yeah, give it a little rinse. This also, just to give some context here, before we started recording, I have been not very well today, and there has been some puking involved. And Ryan asked me if it was okay to talk about food, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Yeah. I'm going to be talking about drilling holes in skulls.
Yeah,
there might have to be some
on safer territory now. It's good.
Yeah, so these days they use diamond-coated cranial drills to make holes in skulls, which are less traumatic than the classical trephines with sharp teeth. No shit, Sherlock.
Yeah, that sharp teeth.
Yeah, sharp teeth. However, people sometimes do this to themselves, or they have someone else do it to them, someone who is not a recognised medical profession.
Oh.
It's kind of a thing. There are groups that advocate drilling holes within your skull for various different reasons, and it's such a thing that on the NCBI, it's the US National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health website, where you would look if you wanted to find a scientific journal. They actually they have a little disclaimer from the called "Doctors Warn of the Dangers of Trepanning." The states from March 4th, 2000, from the British Medical Journal. Doctors have warned about the danger of trepanning after the launch of several websites promoting the do-it-yourself surgery and the case of a Gloucestershire woman who drilled a 2-centimetre diameter hole in her skull. So, it's kind of a... people sort of do it... Sometimes people do it because they're desperate, because they have an illness that is not being treated well or is not responding to treatment. Things like chronic fatigue syndrome and depression and, promoting general well-being, all the rest of it. Right. But here is the lovely quotation from this article that made me include it in my
Okay.
in what I wanted to say today. This comes from Lawrence Watkins, consultant neurosurgeon at the Institute of Neurology, London.
Wow.
There are lots of good reasons for making a hole in someone's head, and in a neurosurgeon's hand, it is not a risky procedure. But for someone doing it themselves, the risks are huge.
That we live in a world where there needs to be warnings against do-it-yourself brain surgery. It says, it just speaks volumes, doesn't it? There's a lot there to unpack.
Pretty awesome. So this article goes on, it mentions Heather Perry, a 29-year-old graduate from Gloucester who went to the United States to carry out the do-it-yourself surgery after contacting one of the websites run by self-styled expert Peter Halverson. Her parents alerted the FBI, but they said they were unable to stop her. So if you really want to go and drill a hole in your head, it seems that's not against the law.
Well, land of the free.
Yeah. Mr. Halverson runs the International Trepanning Advocacy Group. He drilled a hole in his own head in 1972, and he claims that the 9mm wide hole increased his metabolism and got rid of his depression. So there you go. So from holes in an iPhone making people a little bit uncomfortable to the threshing, rubbing, drilling, big dippering journey of the pie route, we come to trepanning, drilling a hole in your skull.
Wow.
Perhaps the oddest word I've ever looked at.
Yeah, there's a lot to. I have so many questions.
I wish I could say I have answers for you, but I mean, I think a pretty big stumbling block is why.
Yeah, it just. What I'm doing is I'm constantly waffling back and forth between abject contempt for someone who would drill a hole in their own skull and advise other people, particularly advising other people to do it. And also just, like, this is where I mean by, like, we get to the point where we have to have warnings saying, guys,
don't
maybe
drill
think
holes in
about
your
not
skull.
Removing a segment of your skull.
Yeah.
It speaks volumes about society, but I can't, I'm oscillating so fast between, it says volumes that, about our education system, that we have people that need to be told this, but also, on the other hand, about the care we take for people who, I'm just going to say it, need help that they aren't getting. And whether that's, like you say, medical or perceived to be medical help they're not getting, or maybe some mental health issues that are maybe being under or undiagnosed or addressed. You know, there's some stuff there that should probably be looked at, and it's.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I think you're right. There are lots of. It would be wonderful to live in a world where everyone's needs were met. Mm-hmm. Needs for all sorts of things, food and clean water and decent jobs and all that stuff. But yeah, I think that's quite a big one.
Wow.
The needs of people who feel they need to drill a hole in their skull. I don't necessarily think that the most straightforward way to meet that person's need is to drill a hole in their damn skull. But it's maybe not the best way. It's maybe not the central need that is looking to be addressed within that situation.
I feel like that's a symptom rather than, treating the symptom rather than the cause thing.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So,
well, that was a hell of a ride. Trepanning.
Yeah, indeed.
Tryptophobia to trepanning to everywhere else. Wow. Okay. Changing gears a little bit. My word this week. You remember fancy pants from Korea?
Fancy.
So my word is
pants.
Fancy.
Do I remember fancy pants from Korea?
Pretty sure that was Orion picked that up as a nickname for a while.
Yes, I do remember this.
I was thinking about a couple of stories involving that crew, and so I had question marks about the word fancy.
Oh,
so I looked up
wonderful.
the word fancy. And this was a great ride. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I suspect you probably will as well. So the first thing that I found that was sort of interesting was that the noun fancy is older than the adjective. So these days, fancy is almost exclusively adjectival, right? Like a fancy thing, like something ornate or sometimes overly ostentatious is something that is fancy. But unless you're being mostly intentionally sort of ornamental with your language, you rarely hear people say, "Oh, I fancy this," or you do, but it's more of an archaic term now, I think.
Okay.
Just, like flights of fancy, or it's poetic language, it's sort of flowery language. It's fancy language. But originally, the noun was much older. So the earliest use as an adjective, the way we use it now, dates back to 1753. And the OED, this is the best thing about, as we've said before many times, the best thing about looking up things on the OED online is access to the earliest sources. And they have little links that tell you where they got their stuff from. So the first citation of fancy as an adjective comes from 1753 in a piece of a written work that is my favorite thing for you to say out loud.
Is it a cookery book?
It is.
Hey.
I'm so happy. So this book is called The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy by one Hannah Glass. G-L-A-S-S-E.
The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy by Hannah Glass.
Yes.
So many delicious vowel changes in that.
It's fun to say.
Yeah.
It's fun to look at. It's awesome. So what she says is a few nasturtium flowers stuck here and there look pretty, but these things are entirely fancy. And so at that point it didn't just mean ornamental and decorative. It meant purely ornamental and decorative.
Okay. No other use.
Over and above, no other use. They just serve the purpose of being decorative and ornamental. Now, incredibly necessary sidebar to this. I found this book because we live in an age where such things are possible.
So great.
So I found the 1784. This was a huge hit. This book was a page-turning New York Times before the New York Times bestseller. This was a big hit book. So I found an edition of this book from 1784. So 31 years later, they're still making reprints and new editions of this book.
We all gotta eat.
Its full title, because in the 1700s, book titles were not based on concision.
No, never.
So the full title, are we ready?
I'm ready. Go for it.
The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy, which far exceeds anything of the kind yet published, to which are added by way of appendix 150 new and useful receipts, and also 50 receipts for different articles of perfumery with a copious index.
Oh, Ryan, you've made me very happy.
That's the title of the following.
Imagine this.
Anyway.
Imagine if they decided they wanted that all on one line on the spine of the book. The book would be about 6 feet high.
I just love it so much, and so it's so good. What I didn't look up, and what I will at some point, is the fact that it doesn't say recipes. It specifically says 150 receipts.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that was interesting. So I'm going to look that up at some point. I didn't this time because I thought the amount
Such
of tangents going on this time. Yeah. So I obviously had to look through this book to see what a massive hit cookbook in the 18th century included. And I was not disappointed.
Oh, so great.
So recipes in this book include calf's foot pudding, a hodgepodge of mutton,
nice,
roast cod's head, an entire chapter devoted to, quote, for captains of ships, where the first ingredient is to make ketchup to keep 20 years. It has instructions on how, quote, to keep gooseberries till Christmas, and instructions on how to pot lampreys, to pot eels, to pot chars, to pot a pike, to pot salmon, and another way to pot salmon.
Just in case the first salmon potting way was not to your liking, have this.
Not only did I think that potting, I didn't actually think of potting eels, lampreys, and chars, but if I had turned my mind to that, I would have thought that there was pretty much one way to do all those things.
Yeah, here's your method. Change the thing in the pot. Nope.
Right.
Not for Hannah Glass. She's just not that kind of girl.
No, and there's not even only one way to pot salmon, because there is another way to pot salmon. So anyway, this was, I was so happy to find this book, and I'm absolutely going to put up like some choice excerpts, and I'm probably just going to put the whole PDF of the book up on our Patreon for our wonderful, wonderful sponsors there, because it's just so good. Anyway, back to fancy, but I couldn't not talk about that because it was so good.
I'd almost forgotten about fancy. I mean,
I know,
yeah.
right? I just thought I was going to do a show about cooking in the 1700s
so excited about fancy,
now.
and then you completely distracted me with wonderful 18th
sure
century
did.
food. Yeah.
Welcome to my brain. So that's 1753. That's the first adjective use of fancy. As a noun, it's much older. Dates back to sort of the mid 1400s. So 1465, it had the usage of to, like, as in a fancy for something, or to take a fancy
right, sure.
to something. So in those type of phrases. 1471, with the meaning of a supposition resting on no solid grounds, an arbitrary notion. So a fancy of something.
I hadn't thought of that.
Is fake
that
and just
meaning
made
of
up,
it.
like an urban myth or something.
Yeah, cool.
And so what it actually is that fancy is a contraction.
No.
And it is a contraction for fantasy.
Shut up. That's the coolest thing ever.
It's literally just people got tired of putting all those syllables in fantasy and just said fancy because it's easier.
Now,
this is how it goes sometimes.
Now, when you said the sort of the sense of it as a made up thing, I thought, oh, like a fantasy rather than a fancy, without in any way considering maybe they're the same.
Yeah, and so that's why the noun version is much older, because it comes from the noun.
Sure.
Fantasy. So now that makes sense. So there's mystery
Wow.
solved. So now we're gonna head over to fantasy and follow this awesome rabbit hole. So fantasy, the earliest uses were like an apparition or a hallucination, or, quote, mental apprehension of an object of perception in scholastic psychology, and those dates back to like the mid 1300s. So it's very, very old. But very specifically, illusory, an apparition of some sort, like. I'm tempted to say a concrete object, but
Yeah, it's all about seeing a thing, isn't it?
yeah, it's not purely abstract imagination.
Yeah, that's
It's
cool.
an imagined visual phenomenon or perception event, is what originally it was, and then of course that'll change down the road anyway. But it comes to English from Old French. And before that, from Latin, fantasia, Phantasia, or
I do love a PH.
Fantasia is probably how that goes. And before that, it came from Greek, basically the same pronunciation as my very limited Greek understanding leads me to believe. And what that meant was literally a making visible. And it comes from the Greek verb meaning to make visible.
Oh, this is so great. I was going to say, I love the notion that in the mid 13th century, things were seen, whether you happened to see them or not. If someone was having a fantasy, they were seeing something.
Yeah.
There's no sense of, don't be ridiculous. You're not seeing that thing. It's not real. It doesn't exist. Because I can't see it. There's just, well, you saw a thing. I didn't see the thing. You are having a fantasy and I am not. It's not it's not like that sense of that you're behaving in a completely ridiculous, made up kind of way. It's just like, oh yeah, you saw a thing. That happens.
Yeah, and the sense of it's not real, it's imaginary, that sense is there, but it doesn't extend to then say, you didn't really see it.
Yeah.
Which it sounds like splitting hairs, but I think it is there's something interesting there.
Yeah, for sure.
It didn't mean it didn't happen, which is
also,
cool.
Splitting hairs is the best kind of fun. And I know that there are people who would like throw heavy objects at me for saying such a thing, but it's true.
It is.
So, making
the inside
visible.
of hairs is where fun lives. So, we go back to pi again. And the pi root here it's transliterated as BHA. I think it's an aspirated B, so ba or pa or whatever, something like that. Because I'm not going to try it, but someday I will look up a pronunciation guide for... What I should do is I should ask Mark from The Endless Knot, because he has loads of fun pronouncing.
Yeah, that's exactly what should happen.
And the pi root there gives us... It means to shine.
Oh.
And it gives us, among other things, it gives us the faux or photo,
Nice.
the PHO root of cognates like photograph, photon, photocopy, phosphorus, sort of those things.
Amazing.
But it also gives, and so it seems to be either a PH branch of this family tree or it keeps the B sound.
Sure.
So you get words like epiphany or phenomenon, but you also get banner and beacon from the same pi root. And there was one word in there as a cognate, and this is my second tangent of the day, but I think it'd be worth it. You can tell me afterwards. It's sycophant.
Such a wonderful word.
It's a great word, and I saw that and I went, that every now and then there's a word in this list of cognates, and everything else you can kind of go, yeah, I can see that.
Sure.
Okay, that makes sense. That's kind of cool. And then there's one that just goes, you just sort of say, wait, what? So a sycophant, it's a suck up, a ingratiating, groveling, sniveling Smithers on The Simpsons is a sycophant. You know, like a yes man.
The Simpsons helps us to make sense of so much of life.
It sure does.
There's a wonderful line in a song by the band Menomina, a great band name, a great band, but it says, "I'm such a sucker for a sycophant," and yeah, it's very, very pleasing. Okay, nice. Smithers.
Mr. Smee to Captain Hook, if you're of that ilk as well. So sycophant, I had to look that up because that's weird. And so sycophant, real briefly, goes back to ancient Greek in that form.
Okay.
And the components in Greek, in ancient Greece, a sycophant was someone who was a false accuser or a slanderer.
Oh.
And it literally meant one who shows the fig. And so psychon, the Greek word for fig, and that phan from the pi root meaning to shine. So one who shows the fig. And according to Edom Online, showing the fig was a vulgar hand gesture with the necessary ancient Greek misogynistic overtones, involving, I guess it's a thumb. It just says a thumb between two fingers, and I'm not sure if that's kind of like the K American Sign Language style, or if it's like showing the V but putting your thumb in the middle of it. I don't know.
I'm doing this thing that I think you mean, and I've seen this before as a rude gesture. I can't remember where in which culture, but so putting your thumb between your first and second fingers and then closing your fist so that the thumb sticks out.
Oh, maybe that's what it is. I hadn't thought about closing the fist before, but maybe that's... Anyway, that's apparently supposed to resemble a fig. And a fig, the Greek word psychon was also the word for vulva, so it's symbolic of a vagina or a vulva, and that's hence the misogynistic, because that's obviously it must be a vulgar and insulting gesture to give to someone. The modern understanding of sycophant comes from the fact, or the idea, the sort of the agreed understanding now, is that Greek politicians and elites were sort of too noble to resort to these base gestures and vulgarities, but they would encourage in secret their devoted followers to engage in that kind of stuff to taunt their opponents in various places. So that's the followers would do these things.
I'm so glad that we've evolved as a society to the point where, if someone has an opinion that you don't necessarily agree with, you can take umbrage with the opinion, with the argument, and certainly not, resort to base physical and personal attacks upon a small Swedish child or anything. Just as an example.
Right. Isn't it nice that we've
so
come
great
so far
that
in
we
the
have
last
evolved
3,000
so far.
years that people no longer
Show the fig.
get their followers to attack other people, their opponents' followers and their opponents, so that they can maintain a veneer of
moral high ground.
genuine moral high ground. Yeah, it's really nice that we don't have that anymore. It's super. So much better. Can you imagine what it would be like if we still...
Probably people would
Anyway.
drill holes in their heads for fun if we lived in a world like that.
They might. Jeez. So sycophant then became the term for these followers, which then just the ingratiating suck-up followers.
That's
are there.
amazing.
Apparently, there's a note in the OED because this, I guess there's sort of an urban folk etymology, urban legend thing around this, where the note in the OED trying to counter that is. It says, the explanation long current that it originally meant an informer against the unlawful exportation of figs cannot be substantiated.
Of course it can't be substantiated. That's crazy.
If you thought...
I'm not an etymologist, I'm not a historian, I'm no kind of expert, but if it comes down, are people more likely to be making rude gestures and trying to mimic female genitalia, or are people more likely to be flaunting import-export rules? I know which one I'm going for there.
Are they narking on the people who are illegally exporting figs?
Yeah.
Or are they just being dicks to each other in politics?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that the human impulse to be dicks to each other is way, it's way more available than our intolerance for fig export.
No, you can't export those figs. He's the one who's illegally exporting figs.
That's social pariah. Such a sycophant.
So if you thought that's what a sycophant once did, you've been misled. They were much worse in general.
It was all about the fannies.
Yeah.
Oh dear. So fancy.
That's fancy. Yeah.
Fancy.
I was pretty happy with that.
It's like a bumper bonus gift that keeps on giving.
It's like every time I reached some sort of new twist and turn, it was like, ooh, I think I'll go down this path for a moment.
Yeah. Yeah, you could get lost in fancy avenues for a very long time.
Yeah.
Also,
and I'm going to get lost in that cookbook for a very long time.
Oh, yeah. Send me the cookbook for sure. I also, it's occurred to me that Fancy Trepanning is a wonderful, wonderful title for an episode of anything.
It sure is.
Not just really that, cup rice Trepanning. We want the fancy one.
No, fancy Trepanning. I want that diamond crusted. Give me that ice.
It's like I have a friend who has a neighbour who was bragging about her plastic surgery. She's bragging about her false breasts, which she had done in a hospital in Turkey because it's really cheap. And I was saying to my friend that, I feel like, I like to economise just as much as the next person. Feel free to make jokes about Scots frugality / meanness.
I was never going to do that.
If you will. Everybody likes to save a bit of cash, but I feel like there's some areas in your life where you need to splurge a little bit. And one of those is surgery.
Yeah.
Don't get the cheap surgery. Get the good surgery.
No.
Get the fancy Trepanning and just save everybody a whole lot of worry.
Everyone, go wear sunscreen, go for the fancy Trepanning.
Yeah.
I feel like that's good, Nice.
Oh, nice.
And that's it for another episode of Lexitecture. To get in touch with us about something you heard this episode, you can email us at words@lexitecture.com. You can also follow along and talk to us at Lexitecture on Facebook and Twitter, and at Lexitecture Podcast on Instagram. For back episodes and the occasional blog post, visit us at Lexitecture.com. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.